Sighting a UFO and being ridiculed for reporting it is upsetting enough for a child. What's far worse is a close encounter of a different kind, alien abduction. For children who've always relied on adults to protect them, these encounters can be traumatic, but kids aren't the only ones affected. Their parents suffer just as much from feelings of helplessness and fear. Having your child abducted is terrifying no matter who or what is doing it. Author Budd Hopkins was one of the first researchers to investigate the abduction phenomenon, and he believes these children are among the most credible witnesses he has ever interviewed. From the Midwest to New York, these stories of alien visitations are strikingly similar. Manhattan-based writer Budd Hopkins has researched thousands of alleged alien abductions.
What has emerged through many, many cases is the idea that the aliens are essentially trying to create a hybrid mix of themselves and ourselves. They're interested in our DNA, our genetic makeup, and beyond that, they're interested in our personalities, our affection for our children, our love for one another, a whole kind of range of what we think of almost the most human characteristics we have emotionally.
One of his most remarkable cases is that of John Cortiglia, an 11-year-old boy from New York's Lower East Side.
When it happened, I had woke up from my sleep, and I had the sudden urge to look out the window in my living room. So I got out of my bed, and I just, went into my living room. I looked out the window, and I saw something emerging from the water. So I didn't know what it was. I just watched it as it came toward my window. And as my mother passed me, I was screaming, and she didn't even hear me. So this thing just pulled me through the window.
John claims that these aliens took him aboard a UFO.
They just took me into the door, and I was just laid down onto my stomach looking out these windows. I do remember some sort of a scraping with a sort of long, rounded object, sort of like a knife, scraping me or scratching me with it, trying to, hurt me or something. I woke up the next morning like it was a dream, only though I knew it wasn't a dream.
Skeptics claim that abduction stories are the product of a child's active imagination, but Budd Hopkins has developed an elaborate system of tests to prove these skeptics wrong.
I developed the Hopkins image recognition test a number of years ago because I felt that a projective test based on simple images and checking the child's response would be a very viable way of looking into their experiences. So I show these children first Santa Claus, and we go through Batman and clowns and police and so on. When we come to the alien out of 10 pictures, which is very neutral, we just listen to what the child says, how the child responds. I have seen a child absolutely fold up in tears, hide herself in her father's lap, crying, "I don't want that man in my dreams. That's the man who takes me away."
Fortunately, these traumatized and bewildered families have the support of concerned experts. Newport Beach, California is the home of Dr. Deborah Trincala. She specializes in the counseling of alien abductees.
I think it's very important that we look at children who've had anomalous experiences in the following way. We need to listen to them. We need to understand that from their world, they don't have a handle on what's happened. They need to have a sense of control over their lives to the degree that they can handle that. That's part of their development. And so we have to be attentive to that need.
If these encounters are the results of some bizarre alien experiment, why are our children being targeted? And when these children grow up, how will the experiment be concluded? All we and they can do is wait.
We'll go into the children's cases, which is the main point here. This particular case is a typical one. This little boy lives in Manhattan. There are 2 apartment buildings separated by a small court. This is a drawing that he did the morning after the incident. Now, this particular recollection, when he woke up, and he was, I believe, 6 years old at the time, perhaps 7, he had awakened in the morning. He was terrified. He was crying. He was extremely upset. And he told his mother that these people with big eyes had come in the house. They had taken him away. And at one point, in the middle of crying and falling apart, he said, He stopped crying and stared at his mother, and he said, "Mommy, why don't you love me anymore?" And she said, "But I do love you. How can you say that?" And he said, "No, you don't, because when I was crying for you, you were just standing there, and you weren't moving, and you weren't even looking at me." The switched off situation. And she, of course, assured him that if she had been able to move, she certainly would have, and so on. I have talked to an awful lot of families and an awful lot of adults who have hidden resentments towards their parents, which, when we explore the situation under hypnosis, turns out to be a case where the child was unable to get help from the parents, and the child forever after secretly harbored the feeling of not being loved and having been abandoned by parents. I would believe, psychologically, if we look into this, that a large number of quote-unquote dysfunctional families in this country may have, a large number of them, may have at their heart, as a cause, the fact of this sort of UFO incident. Now, as I've said hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, I do not regard the UFO occupants as being malevolent, evil stormtroopers doing their awful stuff out of some desire to hurt. They are simply doing what they are doing without any kind of understanding, I truly believe, of our emotions, of our needs, or what they're actually doing in terms of wrecking the texture of life of many, many families, and of course, huge numbers of individuals. I dealt with a woman once who was having trouble in her marriage. She was having trouble with her very young children, and she told me that she was having, all her life, she had had a lot of anger towards her mother. Well, under hypnosis, although she did not know why, she'd done some therapy, nobody could get at what it was about. Well, under hypnosis, she had, I'll back up a moment, she had remembered consciously something coming over the house when she was a very small child. She remembered running and being very frightened and seeing a group of little men with big heads chasing her, being absolutely terrified. And she'd climbed up one of those clothes-drying racks that people have sometimes in their backyard. It's a pole with a series, like an upside-down umbrella on the top, with clothesline. She was able to pull herself up on this as one of her things she did as a little girl. Very tiny kid, but she could pull herself up. She climbed up there and was screaming for help, and these little guys were after her. That's the end of the conscious memory. Under hypnosis, she is up on top of this thing in absolute dread panic, and she's screaming for her mother, and about 20 feet away is the back of the house, and there is a big picture window over the sink, and she can see through the window as she's screaming. Her mother standing there absolutely frozen, holding a dish rag and a plate, just absolutely unmoving, that she was in the process of drying. Now, this little girl harbored from then on the feeling of not being loved and not being protected. I have had this two ways. I've had it from adults. I've had a case where a man pleaded, and he told me this with enormous embarrassment, pleaded with the aliens to leave him alone and take the child. Can you imagine a man even having the strength of character to confess that to somebody? I mean, that's a hard thing for any human being to have to admit. At any rate, these stories are replete with that kind of situation. Now, I don't think the aliens are coming down here saying, well, we're going to really wreck American families. We're going to be destructive. They're just doing their thing according to their particular clipboard with their agenda. They do what they have to do. And they try to make it easy for people, and they try to reduce the pain and the shock. But the fallout is extraordinary. I feel sometimes when people will say, well, they're here for our good, and we're actually the reason they're here to help us, that this is strong medicine. And if it is true, and it is strong medicine, I'm in a position of saying I find the side effects intolerable. Now, to go back to this particular case, this little boy had described floating out the window, going straight up to the sky where there was this craft. And he was there, he draws himself saying, oh God, he was so scared. Now, it's very interesting. His mother had the perspicacity and insight and so on to say to him, sit down and make a drawing, Johnny, of what you saw. And that is extremely helpful for anybody who's going through this with your own children. It's extremely helpful for the child to gain some kind of mastery, some sense of getting some control back over his or her life. So he started working on this very carefully. He pointed out over there that that's the moon, and those little dots around are stars, and he apologized that he had not been able to get all the stars in the picture. And I know what that's like, being an artist myself. But incidentally, I don't know whether any of you have ever seen one of the greatest Larson Far Side cartoons, but it shows a little boy and a little girl up on the top of a hill looking up into the night sky at all this wonderful panoply of stars, and the little boy is saying, you know, there are hundreds and hundreds of stars up there. And the caption is, Carl Sagan is a child. At any rate, he went straight out the window and straight up into this crag. This is his drawing, part 2. On the left is one of the men who was in the craft. And on the right, in the middle there, I should say, is himself, with his little shirt. Now, his mother asked him what those curving lines were all around his head. They may be hard for you to see in the audience. He has all these little curving lines, his funny eyes. And he said, that's me, Mommy, shaking and shivering because I'm so scared. Now, it's extremely important to realize that he has drawn his own hands the way children will often do. My daughter did that too when she was a little child. My mother claims I did it until I was 19, and then I learned how to draw it. But the hand is like a little flower. It's a series of little loops, and that's the way he draws human hands. But when he got to the aliens, he decided to do a different hand, and he actually drew over them, the one sitting at the console on the right, who incidentally, he said, never turned around and looked at me, which is very typical of alien behavior. I mean, I always thought that's very different than our, if our astronauts ever got some alien specimen and had it standing there, you know, in a spaceship, I'm sure every American astronaut would be crowding around for a look. But the aliens, the ones who sit at the consoles, just sit at the consoles. They have no curiosity. They don't have, apparently, that kind of range of human emotion. But anyway, the little guy is sitting there. He had drawn the flower hand, and then he went over it with these sharper things, which he put on the alien on the left. The dots were to make the face gray, and he said they didn't have noses that he could see, which is quite interesting. A child tries to get things right. This is a little boy who wants to be very literal. Now, I'll read you something he said from an interview I did with him, which I think is very, very nice. He said, I was really scared. Something was pulling me, and I went out the window. The creatures didn't talk to me, and I was afraid they were going to keep me in, whatever you call it, the flying machine, and I'd never see Mom or Dad or Stephen again, his brother. I was scared of them because I didn't know who they were or what they were. I was scared because what if they kidnapped me and never brought me home? What if they turned me into one of them? He said in cartoons they're green with aliens, with antennas and stuff, but they weren't like that. They were weird looking. They had faces, gray-like, and black eyes, big black eyes, and their eyes sort of looked like upside-down tear shapes. I don't know if they had a nose. I just saw 2 little lines there and a mouth. No ears, but I think they could hear me. They don't have strong bodies. The way they look in the face, they look sad. Maybe they're always sad. I haven't told anybody at school. I'd be too embarrassed and scared to tell my teachers. They'd call me a liar. I only tell my mom. I really think the creatures are doing harm. People don't deserve to be scared when they sneak up and take you. Just thinking about it is scary. Now, when this little boy was just back from the hospital after his birth, he was put in a room with his older brother, who was 7 years old at the time. And the mother said that she woke up one night when actually she was awake at the time. She has a lot of trouble sleeping at night. She's had enough abduction experiences of her own, and sleep disorders are very, very common in these situations. She said that her little son came in and said, Mommy, there are 3 little doctors looking at Johnny. And she went into the room. He said they have lights and they're shining a light on her. So she went in and, of course, very frightened. She said she peeked around the door very slowly and nothing was there. Anyway, this is Steve's drawing that he did at the age of about 14 or so of the 3 little doctors standing next to the crib. And as you can see, they're pretty small, looking at little Johnny. This is a family that had multiple experiences. This is a drawing by a little boy who, again, got the sense of the huge eyes, and the mouth and not much else, part of the alien. There's a long, complicated story that goes with this, and I will make it short and complicated. This little boy lives in North Carolina with his sister, and at the time she was perhaps, I guess, 5 and he was 7. They began telling their mother separately that the night people, as they called it, were coming in and taking them out, and they went right through the wall. One of the children said, "You go right through the wall and you don't get dirty." And then they went up this blue light beam into this place in the sky, and she said, "You see the weird children up there. They have weird children." And she described the weird children as not looking like them, the night people, and not looking like us. She said they have big heads, but they have hair, but it's all white and there isn't much of it. And she said they don't smile, and we have to play games. They want us to play games with the children, with the weird children. But I don't like to play games because they don't understand my games and I don't understand their games. What's fascinating, and I'll get back to this in a minute, is an attempt to kind of get an interaction between, it's a very touching thing in a way, between what I believe to be hybrid children and normal humans. And incidentally, again, I always want to make the point, when I use the word alien, I'm not using it in any pejorative sense. I use it in the most accurate sense possible. It's to say what something isn't. And I say again and again, when I'm in Mexico City, I'm an alien. It says nothing about where I'm from. When I say these people are alien, they're not from North Haven or Nebraska or wherever. But anyway, the little girl in this case, his sister, said at one point that she was taken outside. She told her mother the night people came and took her outside, and they were holding a little boy from the neighborhood out there. This is at night. And she said it's little Sammy, or whatever his name is, who lives down the block, who was also 4 or 5. She said they were holding him and they were sticking something sharp up his nose, and he was crying. Now, we know about nasal implants, and we know how many cases we hear of this. I have a case from Long Island where a woman was in her kitchen and her child, who was 2 1/2, was playing in her room, and she heard blood-curdling screams and ran into that room, and there was the little girl. She said, inconsolable, and she finally calmed her down, and the little girl was able to say in 2 1/2-year-old language that funny boys, bad boys, had come in and had held her and had stuck something sharp up her nose and had hurt her. In the case of Dr. John Mack, a colleague of mine who was a psychiatrist in the Boston area, the family he's working with, a little girl went into her parents' room, woke them up, and she said her little brother, who was about 2 1/2 or 3, was bleeding, and they ran into the room and there was blood coming from his nostril and all over the place. The child was sound asleep and with a smile on his face, peaceful. And they woke him up, and he said, and I've recently spoken to that child's mother, that the monster had come in with the funny eyes and had stuck something sharp or bitten him or whatever the term was. It was a little change from just sticking something up his nose, but had done something up his nose, and that's why he was bleeding. So we have, of course, over and over and over again, nasal implant accounts from books written up by and about adults. But these are very pure childish accounts by little people who have not read the books and have not sat up and watched Stan Friedman on Nightline or something of that sort. This is something that they are just getting from their own experience, period. Now I'm going to come back to this family because I saw the little boy who made that previous drawing. I saw him a couple of years after he made that drawing. And he made this drawing for me. I said, would you please make a drawing for me of the night people? So he sat down and made this. First he made a head, and then he made the eyes, and then he made the teeth, like sharp teeth. And then he started on this wild hair. And what he came up with was a fairly aggressive-looking drawing. Now, I, as an artist, used to looking at the kind of emotion that certain kinds of lines and choices of color convey. And I wanted to see what the bottom line was, what this child's normal drawing style was. So I said, would you please draw me now a picture of your little sister? So this is what he drew. And incidentally, the thing sticking up in the middle of her head is her ponytail, because it's a little hard to... Now, a little difficult to see this together, but it's interesting comparatively. The normal human, his little sister, is small and sweet. Her arms are down, and she has a very sweet, lovely little smile. The alien night person, he calls it, is rather fierce and aggressive. His arms are reaching out, the hair reaches out. He's, in a sense, invading the space around him, whereas the little girl seems to be very content within her space. She's not, in any sense, at odds with what's around her, which I think says a great deal about the attitude here. Now, let me read you the kind of thing I get from adults. We'll go on here, because there's a lot of material. This is the kind of thing you get. Now, again, this happens to come from New Zealand, and I just mentioned that I got a very touching account of a child abduction from the little boy's father, and this incident took place in Guyana. Just received that last week. So these are worldwide. This woman writes from New Zealand, I feel the need to put down on paper an incident that occurred to my youngest son, Billy, earlier this year. First of all, I'll tell you about our family so you have a picture in your head. We're an average New Zealand family, very close. My husband and I have 2 sons, 11 and 8. She describes how they work, what they do. Billy is a nervous child who has long had a fear of being alone. He has an exterior of being a real man's man, but he is soft as a marshmallow inside, with a low self-esteem which are constantly trying to build up. Late in January this year, I was awakened by Billy calling out to me. He sleeps in the next room. He screamed, Mom, there's 2 aliens staring at me. Normally, if ever the boys need me in the night, my feet are on the ground before I'm awake. But despite the terror in his voice, I called out to him that it was only a dream and to go back to sleep. Now, it's a classic case of some kind of exterior control which separates the parents, switches them off, renders them useless in effect, and so that the child can be taken if that's in fact what happened. But she is aware of how odd her behavior was. And for those of us who have children, as I have, and I know most of you, or many of you in this audience do, if some child is screaming a thing like that, would you ever imagine, just go back to sleep, Sonny, you're having a dream, that you wouldn't get out of bed to look? She said about an hour later, I heard him crying, and this time I went into him. He was sitting up in bed. I cuddled him, and he told me 2 aliens, his words, were standing by his bed staring at him. They didn't speak, they just stood there. There was a light behind them, so their faces were in shadow. One was taller than the other, and they didn't move. They just stared for ages. He was too terrified to move, he said. After a while, they turned and walked away, and then he cried for me. Normally, I would put it down to a bad dream, except for his behavior the next day. He was tired the first thing, and as I dropped him off at my sister's for 2 hours, while I took his brother to an appointment, I thought he'd play quietly or watch TV. However, by the time I got back to him, he was lying on the floor crying, with a bad headache, which had only been mild earlier on. Also, he seemed to have a sore groin. He told my sister about the 2 aliens in his bedroom, drawing a picture and insisting they were real. It was not a dream. All that day he was listless and weepy. I've never seen Billy listless and weepy like that, even when he's sick. Occasionally he still mentions the aliens and maintains they were real. His fear of being alone now is worse. Once it was just that he was afraid of being alone in the car. He wouldn't stay in the car alone even if I was popping into the dairy to get milk. But now he must know where I am all the time in the house. And if he's, say, watching TV, he'll check every 10 minutes or so to make sure I'm still there. On rereading the last paragraph, it makes Billy sound like a neurotic kid. He's not. It's just his one fear. He's outgoing, friendly, and lovable. I don't know why I'm writing to you such a jumbled letter, except the need to put this in writing. I have an awful urge to bury it all in my mind and try to forget it happened. But I want to protect Billy somehow, and I feel so helpless. Now, this is, of course, so typical, and in order to try to help parents, in order to have some way of eliciting these accounts, because you obviously can't go to a child and ask questions out of the blue about a traumatic experience that had better be left buried, actually, at that point, rather than bringing it up. Unless you're prepared to do something which might somehow alleviate the child's fears, allow him to talk about it without underlining the situation or focusing upon it. And that's why I've developed a projective test. I'll show you this one last drawing by another little boy who's been through these experiences. A wonderful drawing of an alien, and I think the most touching thing is he has coming out of the alien's mouth these words, "If only I had a friend." It's very odd how children seem to have picked up on the sense of the aliens, let's say sadness, loneliness, yearning for the richness of the human condition, of the human experience. I've said over and over again that they are learning from us. We have so much to give them that they need, but we'll talk about that in a moment. Now, this is the ultimate alien, I guess. One of the things that I decided to do was to design a projective test. And Sal Amendola did the drawings for me. He's a cartoonist. He actually worked on the Batman strip for a while. And what I said was I want 10 coloring book style, neutral kinds of drawings of familiar images. And this is what we do. It's an image recognition test. I will take these 10 cards to a child, and we will play games. And I love to play with kids anyway, so we usually get going in all kinds of stuff. Sometimes I've even forgotten to do the test. I was having such a good time. But you play with the child, and then at a certain point, I'll say, "Hey, I've got a game here. See if you know who or what these are." So it becomes a big challenge. So we do Santa Claus. We tried to design this so that it was a little racially ambiguous. We wanted as wide a range of things as we could get. We didn't want to scare anybody. But this leads into the Halloween thing. The very last is this. And what I was interested was to see whether children would be able to differentiate between a skull with big black eyes and our little friend back here. Now, in the case of one of the tests, there's a little girl who talked to me about Kevin. She first had been absolutely terrified about this man that came into her room. She took her up into the sky. She said, "They take me to see the doctor. They hurt me. They put and so forth." It was a very, very sad business. She was extremely terrified. Then she turned it, as some of these children will do, they'll turn it around into, "He's my best friend." It's wonderful. This is a combination of, I believe, of the great human ability to rebound from trauma and fear and to try to make something out of it. Think of all the Vietnam vets who have gone through a horrible experience but nevertheless have learned and grown from the experience and turned it into something that in an emotional inner way is positive for them. I see this all the time with abductees. And it's a very interesting thing. I think people who've had abduction experiences, for the most part, have been enriched on some level and have grown and developed, just as I think people who've survived the Vietnam War have been enriched and have grown and developed as a result. And yet, I have never met an abductee nor a Vietnam vet who, when I asked, "Would you want your child to go through these experiences?" would ever say yes. Now, this little girl, when I first met her, one that I was referring to, calls the person who comes in her room and takes her, calls him Kevin. And when I showed her these cards, she immediately said, "That's Kevin." And her little sister, who her mother thought was completely free, had said, "Mommy, I saw Kevin last night. He was in the room." And the older sister and Kevin, she said, "They floated right through the wall." And she said, "I can't float, so I don't go with them." And when I took this to show the little girl through going through this whole routine, she immediately said, "That's Kevin who's in there, who's my sister's friend." This is what Amy said when she was 6 years old. She said, "Kevin is my best friend. He loves me. He has big black eyes and no hair. He takes me in his ship, and there are bad Kevins there that hurt me. They made a boo-boo on my tummy. Kevin took my mommy, too. She was asleep, but he woke her up, and we went up into his ship. He didn't wake up Daddy. Kevin has magic. He helps me fly out the window to his ship. Mommy went with us." And then listen to this, a 6-year-old child. "There was a nurse in his ship. She had a little baby, and she let me hold it. It was light. It was a girl, and she had gray hair. The nurse told me I'd have to give her back when I went home. The baby didn't cry while I held her. The nurse was small, like Kevin. She was all in white. Sometimes I'm scared when Kevin comes. I asked this little girl if she'd ever held a real baby outside of this, and she said no, she hadn't. Of course, parents, again, all those of you out there are not in the habit of handing a baby to a 6-year-old child, I hope. But at any rate, the baby, she said, did not squirm around, didn't wiggle, and didn't cry. She just held it. And all the time she was holding the baby, her mom was on the table and didn't have any clothes on, she told me, and things were happening to her mother. At any rate, this little figure can elicit all kinds of things when you suddenly come upon it. And what I generally do is I tell the child if they like this the best, they usually do. They love the Ninja Turtle. I say at the end of all this, after we've gotten any kind of conscious and unconscious responses from the child, or at least, let's say, subliminal responses, body language, just looking at the pictures. Afterwards, I'll say, now this is the best part of this game. I said, we're going to take this card, and I'll say this picture, and I'll say, you're going to make up a story. And I want any story you can make up. You must make up really terrific stories. And this can be a silly story, or a scary story, or a funny story. It can be any story. But you're going to make up a story. He comes into your room. Now, what does he say to you? And what do you say to him? And what happens? And then we go through the story, of course, and then we go to this one. And I was working with a family. The mother was a psychiatrist, and her little 3.5-year-old had been talking about these experiences. And when we hit this one, and she went through them like this: Batman, clown, turtle, little girl, policeman. He's the man that comes in, and we went out the window, and we went up in the light, and Mommy was up there, and Mommy was on the table, and Mommy was crying or something, whatever it was. And the mother is sitting there horrified, not knowing, obviously, that this had happened to her. But then the child went on to the other stories immediately afterwards. It's a wonderful way of eliciting some kind of recollection. And one of the interesting things about it was, in one case, I got fooled by forgetting how wonderfully literal kids can be. I said, do you know who or what these people are? That's the way I introduced it. Got to this one, the child said no, she didn't know. Later on, I asked, did you dream about any of these people? She said, him. And I said, what happened in the dream? And she said, well, he came in my room in the dream, and he had a knife, and he cut me with it. And I said, what kind of knife? I said, they're long, thin knives that you cut meat with, and a little pointy knife. She said, a little pointy knife. And I said, where did he poke you with it? She said, in my belly button. And at this point, the child had been to 6 doctors just in the past week because of this enormous rash of like water blisters around her navel, which had all burst, and she had scabs. There was no pain, there was no itching, there didn't seem to be any scarring, there didn't seem to be any after effect. It was just horrible to look upon, but there didn't seem to be any kind of immediate other problem. But this had happened just after this particular dream about this little person. But at any rate, go through this. Very often when we get to this, the child says either that's a skeleton. They never sort of mix it up. They know there's a difference. There's no connection whatsoever. They know exactly what they're looking at. But at any rate, the little girl who, when we were dealing with that figure that she said she didn't know who or what it was, and she said she had dreamed about it, I realized that she was saying to me, I don't know who or what that is. She simply didn't know. It was a kind of a literal reaction. It wasn't that it was a strange thing to her. She had experienced its presence many times. And I was always reminded about something I know every one of the audience has had as an experience. You call a friend, and the little child at your friend's house answers and says hello, and you say, is your mommy there? And the child says, yes. And then you say, could I talk to your mommy? Children tend to go in a certain kind of literal way, and I didn't ask the right question. Anyway, just to get back to one other aspect of this, this is the father's leg on the right and his son's little boy, I believe in the age range of about 5, but I may be off by a year or so. This is a scoop mark similar to that on his father's leg, which just turned up more or less overnight. The father had taken the little boy to a dermatologist because of a strange rash that he had. The dermatologist had examined him, given him some salve for the rash. He came back 3 or 4 days later. The rash had cleared up, but a little hard to see, I'm sorry, it's a dark slide. But all of a sudden, this wound was there, and it had completely healed, and it hadn't been there 4 days earlier. And the doctor was quite astonished about it. But of course, this is another physical dimension of this whole abduction phenomenon. Now, mind you, if abductions begin in childhood, as I believe they do, and my guess is that the vast majority begin in the first year of life. That's a guess, but I believe it's probably going to turn out to be accurate. That means that if somebody reaches the age of 25, they may have had numerous experiences, and they may remember pieces of 1 or 2 of them. So the whole thing remains a buried phenomenon. I don't think that this little boy probably remembers much about it. I'm showing this by comparison to an adult scoop mark. This is Kathy Davis' mother. And incidentally, the young woman I dealt with this afternoon who had the experience with the cat, she has a small mark rather similar to this on her ankle that more or less was discovered by accident with no apparent recollection of how it came there. This is another scoop mark that was in the process of healing. Usually these things heal very, very quickly. This one took a little longer. Can we have the lights back on? Now, the basic point with experiences with children is we have the abduction phenomenon raw. We have it clean. We have it very, very clear cut. It is not overlaid with the 2 basic human needs that we all have, which is to translate everything into gods or devils. Everything has to be somehow here to help us or here to do us in. And I have lived a lot of years doing research, trying to follow the data as clearly as possible and not falling into traps of trying to decide who or what the aliens are, where they come from, any of those things. People talk very coolly and blithely about the Pleiadians here and the Reticulans here and so forth and so on. Nobody has the slightest real idea or any kind of strong evidence about the origin of the phenomenon, nor do we know what will ultimately come of it. In the short term, there is absolutely no doubt that they, whoever they are, have an agenda, and that agenda seems to be to take sperm, ova, physical properties of human beings for their own purposes, which seem to be some kind of reproductive experiment involving hybridization and who knows what else. But beyond that, a strong interest in trying to absorb and learn something about human emotions, human diversity. I think they are fantastically interested in even a simple thing as how we love our own children, our own kind. There's something immensely touching to me about the fact that there are so many presentation scenes described in these UFO abduction experiences where a small baby is handed, in the case I described, to a little girl to hold. There's something that they want to understand that we have that they don't seem to have. I think that in a way they're hungry for humanity. They're desperate for what we have that they seem to lack. What they have, of course, is a technology which is infinitely beyond anything we could imagine. But they seem to have bypassed the simple human richness that everyone here in this room has experienced in all of his or her years. It's something that they need and desire. Now, one of the most touching children's cases, I think, illustrates something in a very direct way. A woman on the Cape I've worked with, Cape Cod, has a family. Many of them have had these UFO experiences. I believe she has 5 children. But the little girl who was about 5 years old in her family she's described over and over again being taken out of the room by these little people, etc. Sometimes it's nice, and sometimes she's scared to death, and it's a mix, as it always is. But she described a little man coming in with big eyes, and he took her out, but he had a little girl with him. And the little girl was funny looking. She had blonde hair, and she had big eyes and a big head, but she didn't look like him. And he said, "We have to go. There are friends waiting." So he took the little Cape Cod girl and this very odd little, I believe, hybrid child, for want of a better term, I'll call her that. And they went to a playground. And in the playground and this was nighttime, but she said they must have been playing baseball because all the lights were on. This is a baseball field with no lights. But at any rate, this is in the town of Dennis on Cape Cod. And there lined up were 9 more little children, weird children, as the other child might say. She said they don't smile and they look exactly alike. She said they're all twins, the way she put it. And they're all wearing the same little white jumpsuits. And the man told her, the little Cape Cod girl, that she was to ride on the swings and the slides and show the children how to play. So she went up and down the slides and swings. She went back and forth, the seesaw and everything, getting more and more upset because she wanted the children to play with her. She's a human being. She's gregarious. She has all these wonderful qualities that we own, that are ours. But the children just stared at her. She said they didn't smile, they didn't say anything, they just looked. And over again she had to ride the slides and swings. Now I think that there's something immensely touching about this. The little boy who made the drawing and had the alien saying, "If only I had a friend." What comes out of these cases seems to be a strange detachment, an emotionless world that seems to be hungry for the richness and diversity of human life. And though some people have said they're here to help us, I think there's no evidence that they're here to help us or to harm us, but I think they're here to get what we have in abundance. And in a strange way, I end up being as optimistic as it is possible to be, granted the bad side effects that these events are causing in people's lives. I hope for some kind of ultimately optimistic ending to this whole strange phenomenon as it's affected so many people around the world. Thank you.
Implants that have been recovered and perhaps examined and analyzed?
The question was about the status of implant investigation right now. There are, I believe, 5 objects, alleged objects, that are being studied from 5 different individuals, different parts of the body. They're being taken extraordinarily seriously, and they are being looked at by major people. But this is the problem right now. To prove a negative, to prove that this thing, this strange little thing with odd attributes, is impossible to have originated, it's impossible for it to have originated on Earth, is a very hard thing to prove. No scientist who is a full professor somewhere is going to come out and say, ladies and gentlemen, this could not be made on Earth. This is an alien implant. It would, no one is going to do that lightly, let's put it that way. And no one is yet ready to make that kind of announcement. I don't want to make any large claims. I'm not that kind of scientist at all. I don't know the people who are working on this I have enormous confidence in. Truly, these objects are anomalous, peculiar. They don't make sense being found where they were when certain things are found in very odd places in the human body. Just the fact that there was something physical that turned up there is already a weird situation. But it's something which, of course, is filled with hope, I believe, as an area of research. But we can't really say too much more than that. You have a question?
What do you tell the children that you feel they need to tell the
The question about reassuring children what to say, this is one of the most central problems that I've run into over and over again. I think that people, just to start with, people have to realize that being in the position I'm in with 2 books that are still in print with the address in the back, the Intruders Foundation and so on, that I'm getting still at least 2 new probable abduction cases every single day. On a certain day when the mail comes in a clutch, I might get 10 new cases in a day. The amount of data, one of the reasons I was sharing those letters, both those letters arrived in the past 4 or 5 days, something like that. The reason I was sharing that is just to give you a sense of the amount of data that has to be dealt with. One has to come up with things that can be helpful because there are desperate parents very, very often on the other end of the telephone or in the letters. Now, I had 2 major psychiatrists who are extremely interested in this visiting me, And they were dealing with a woman who was talking about what was happening to her son. And she said, I told him it wasn't real, I would have helped you, you must have had a nightmare. And both psychiatrists said, no, you must not tell the child it was a nightmare if the child does not think it was a nightmare. If the child calls it a nightmare, you can call it a nightmare. If the child says it was real, you say it was real. Because the one thing you can't do is separate yourself from the child. The child needs you to be on his or her side. The child desperately needs somebody to accept what's telling or she's telling. So the first point is to use the child's language, to agree with it, to accept it. And then both psychiatrists said, I thought, a remarkable thing. They said, you must say to the child, there are lots of things in this world which we don't understand. There are lots of times when your mom and dad are going to have trouble protecting you from everything. The world is full of complicated things, some of which are good and some of which are bad and some of which are hurtful and some of which are nice. But the main thing is we're all here together. We love you. We're doing everything we can to protect you, and we want you to talk to us whenever you feel these things, but not to claim omnipotence. You're not to claim that you will stop this from happening. You'll protect the child. And then immediately to get the child to make drawings, to get that sense of control. Now, one psychiatrist who's part of my network has developed the puppet therapy that's used in incest cases and child abuse cases and so on, sexual abuse cases. He's using it in these cases, and of course there are a lot of analogies here. But it's interesting that when he worked with this little girl, and she took different puppets played different parts, and he had the alien puppets or whatever she called the people with the funny eyes. They put the little girl puppet down and they started doing something to her stomach and so forth. And then he said, he picked everything up. He said, now what would the little girl hear? What would she do with the people with the funny eyes? And she started smashing the other puppet with all of her strength. And he said he had to distract her by saying, let's go get a Coke and so forth. But the anger and the fear and everything that welled up in this little child was amazing. But puppet therapy is useful. I think that the book has to be written on this. And it's one of the major issues. And of course, if the child is lucky enough to have parents who will accept the reality of these experiences, that's at least 3/4 of the battle right there. I don't know whether what I'm saying is helpful enough, but it's important.
So why do abductions seem to run in families?
Why do abductions run in families? This, I think, again, has to do with the genetic curiosity and focus of the abduction experience. In other words, I think they're following bloodlines, and that's why, even to the sense that you almost get the feeling that there's a control, that they'll take a woman and they'll take 2 of her children and leave 2 of her other children alone, as if there's some kind of, I don't know, control. Who knows? We really can't answer a question like that, but it certainly is true. It's one of the things that I discovered and wrote about in Intruders, and also hinted at it in Missing Time. But it's one of those things that has been certainly replicated by other investigators around the world. Question?
But right now, mutilated and missing cats are a major problem in Plano, Texas, which is a suburb north of Dallas. It's a upper class, basically, community. And I talked with the lieutenant, well, he's actually in the police department last week. They now have over 100 cases, and he is completely and totally baffled. And I will talk more about that tomorrow, but I'm really glad you brought up that case. You
know, for those who didn't hear, Lindy was talking about Plano, Texas, the town where missing cats are numbering over 100 now. This is a very wild question.
Yes, on the issue of the implants. On the issue of the implants. Is there a particular place where the implants are discovered, and are they discovered, are they retrievable, and what is your speculation as to their purpose?
Well, 2 implants have come from different places. Some have come from lower areas of the body. There were 2 which were on the other side of the penis. There are several cases of what we suspect are scrotal implants, which have not yet been retrieved, but are clearly there, but they may turn out to be something different. Of course, the nasal implant thing is very, very common. But the point is they're in places where there shouldn't be anything. Oh, let me just mention about the penile implant. There's a recent case that a colleague of mine was working on, where a woman was driving to work in, I believe, Massachusetts, to the hospital where she was a nurse. When she got there were a couple of nurses who were associates of hers who were very upset. They had been outside, and they had seen this enormous object right over the hospital with lights on it. Now, the woman driving in had seen this same thing, apparently, or something very similar to it, so they were comparing notes. But when the two nurses went back to work, they had gone outside to have a cigarette, because I understand they don't allow smoking in hospitals. It's supposed to be a joke. I'm sorry. It's a very lame joke. But at any rate, when the two nurses went back to work, they were in a ward with completely comatose patients. And when they had to do certain procedures with these patients, one of the nurses discovered that a male patient had an 1.5 inch long slit on the underside of his penis. And another woman had an incision in her abdomen. These were totally comatose people. And how something like this could happen, I don't know whether that would imply an implant of some sort. But these are people who perhaps will never recover from their comas. It's a very odd business. But maybe we'll take another question. And one more question. Who performs hypnosis? Well, we've got dozens and dozens and dozens of people now, thank goodness, doing it here and there in different countries. I've been at this for going on 17 years, and for the first 8 years, I had numerous different people doing it for me, psychiatrists, psychologists. I had dinner just the other night with one who's done a great deal of hypnosis for me. Then I started doing it myself, and I've been doing it in many, many cases since 1983. Yes. And I also have had 5 psychiatrists come to me to have me hypnotize them because of their experiences. Okay, thank you very much.